At the beginning of this series, I quoted a famous psychologist who stated that you cannot understand the human mind without looking at its two constituent parts, that being both the brain and its environment, at the same time. The reason I think the obstacle-goal relationship is so effective as an explanation of intelligence is that it accounts for this dichotomy between the internal and external components. Without them, we can know nothing of the situation at all. And yet, surprisingly, people do not consciously understand this. People intuitively know when a person is a genius or a dolt, and people intuitively understand that the mouse which consistently and successfully navigates different mazes after the fewest trials must be the smartest of the bunch. But I positively guarantee that if you ask a layperson on the street to explain the theory behind it, to require them to take more information into account in the pursuit of a greater understanding of the underlying phenomenon, they will painfully stumble through an excessively verbose response and may very well miss the point altogether. But our intuitions are not infallible either. Clearly, people still form association fallacies, and the one I am highlighting here is so pervasive that even non-believers entertain them. So what is the necessary paradox? Well, before I can explain why it is necessary, let me explain the paradox itself. If you've followed me up to this point, two things should be readily apparent. First, it is not possible for a thing to be so complicated that it had to be designed, because that's not what design is, and that's not how intelligence works. It is either as reasonably simple as it can be for the task at hand, or else it isn't the product of understanding. Second, it is not possible to demonstrate infinite intelligence and infinite power at the same time, because the requisite conditions for the perception of their existence are mutually exclusive. So to say that God has demonstrated infinite intelligence by designing an infinitely complex universe is only to say that he is infinitely limited, but a God who is infinitely limited is not a God. It would be demonstrably false to say that God had to use anything so complex as DNA in order to make biological life possible, and yet that is exactly the position required to make an intelligent design argument feasible or convincing. Think about it. The same people who say that God is omnipotent and unknowable are the same people arguing to know God's intent with the universe and what it took for him to make it work. Even if we followed them to the conclusion of their desires, they would still be missing all two of the two components necessary for an intelligent design argument, and yet that is the name of the argument they use to support their belief. And though many skeptics have provided great rebuttals to assertions about the universe being finely tuned, they repeatedly overlook the fact that the bestest proof of these statements lie within these statements themselves. The argument that the universe is finely tuned is based on the idea that God doesn't have any control over some aspects of our physical reality. The verb to tune means that there are standards that exist external to the operator, and the only use for such a word is for situations in which we have only limited control. If your guitar produced every sound you ever wanted without any adjustment, you would never have to tune it. By declaring that you do need to tune it, you are saying that it is not possible for your guitar to play every sound you desire, and that it takes intentional active adjustment to bring it to its proper settings for a given task. You do not decide what frequency your favorite radio station operates at, and that is why you have to tune your radio to a requisite frequency of the electromagnetic spectrum to hear your favorite songs. Tuning cannot, by definition, take place when obstacles to a goal do not exist, when an action doesn't need to be performed. There would be no adjustment if no adjustments were necessary, and unnecessary adjustments cannot qualify for the definition of tuning because a causal relationship has to exist in order for an adjustment to cause correctness. And yet God is supposed to have been the author of what is possible and what is required. He shouldn't have to adjust the universe like an aftermarket automotive accessory in order to cause harmony to exist within its boundaries. If you accepted that the universe didn't need to be finely tuned in order to work, then it would be a moot point and you would never bother bringing it up. But if God had to tune the universe in order to make it work, if he cannot play the universe out of tune, then he doesn't have creative license, which means he isn't the creator. You should find it exceedingly ironic that the one condition you think most proves the existence of an omnipotent being is the one in which indicates he is the most limited. That there isn't a single cosmological constant in all the universe that he couldn't adjust without disastrous results, as if one should worry about the stability of their house of cards when it is they who decides the property of gravity. But here is the crux of the matter. This is the point I want to make to you. We cannot expect anything different. The paradox is not that theists attempt to substantiate the existence of a limitless being by describing its limits. It is that this is the only possible scenario for a person who incorrectly believes that complicated things are necessarily the result of intelligence. Intelligence exists as a word, as a concept, as an explanation for the accomplishment of goals despite limitations. We only know a thing is intelligent when it is limited, and the only way to know how intelligent a person is to further limit them with a test. Even when a person enters into a contest by which they are pitted against the wits of another person, they must submit to the rules of the game or adhere to some sense of logic if they wish to be lauded for their efforts. But we also only know of the existence of consciousness when a thing demonstrates intelligence. The acknowledgement of consciousness presupposes the existence of the internal-external dichotomy of mental motivation amid pre-existing circumstances. Any attempt at a logical justification for the existence of a creator God must inherently involve the contradictory positions that the God is both limited and not limited at the same time. Let me say that again. Any attempt at a logical justification for the existence of a creator God must inherently involve the contradictory positions that the God is both limited and not limited at the same time. I swear to you that if you go back through any significant argument with any creationist you've ever had in your entire life, you will find half a dozen claims about what God can't do and how his choosing a certain action instead of another allowed a preferable outcome. And most of those people will also say that God exists beyond logic. You see, the problem that creationists are trying to avoid here is the acknowledgement that when no limits are available and no goals are known, unintelligent actions are indistinguishable from intelligent ones because you are operating in an absence of discriminating circumstances and objectives. When that happens, it becomes increasingly difficult to justify the notion that a supernatural consciousness exists because such a thing requires intelligence as a fundamental property. What theists predictably try to do then is to substantiate the existence of the consciousness by attempting to prove that intelligence is required to formulate a universe, and from that position they argue that intelligence has been demonstrated, ergo, evidence for God. But of course in doing so, they only demonstrate their own lack of understanding of how we assess the presence of power or intellect in the first place, and the differences between demonstrations of power and intellect are perfectly described by the obstacle-goal relationship, a relationship that simply demands simplicity. Again, this isn't an isolated phenomenon, it is how we think. It is why we have Occam's razor, it is why we have the principle of parsimony, it is why we say work smarter, not harder, it is why we aim to hit two birds with one stone wherever possible. Great minds think alike because when all relevant limits are known and agreed upon by all parties involved, there is usually only one simplest solution. Even when someone aims to be unpredictable, as they are in combat, comedy, and games of strategy, complexity only arises where it is beneficial. Complexity in strategy only exists because of the limits that are acknowledged by warriors and generals who understand the value of surprise and the impediment of predictability. And as with all simplistic approaches to success, the difference between genius and foolishness in applying straightforward tactics such as the blitzkrieg is a fine line that is only retrospectively determined by the authors of history.